Welcome back to my sewing room. This is block number 4 in the Sew Your Stash series, and the block is called Chex Mix. Now you can make my Chex Mix blocks with any size squares, and the first one I'm going to talk about today is 1.5 inch squares, and that's what I used to make the blocks for this pillow. Now when you use 1.5 inch squares, the block finishes at 7 inches, and I made 9 blocks for this pillow. For the background squares in each of these blocks, I used the same one. It's called shirting for my Be Backgrounds collection. And then I used 2 prim prints for the borders on each block. And for the 1.5 inch colored squares, I just choose from my muffin tins that I keep by my machine that I've showed you before. So in both projects, when I add the outer borders on each block, I use 2 different fabrics because I like the effect that it adds when you sew them together. So for one block you need 12 background squares and 13 of the colors. So I'm using all aqua, but they're all scrappy. And then of course we'll need the borders. I'm going to go over to the machine and show you how to sew this block together. Okay, so here we are at the machine and let's get started. The first thing I do is grab my 12 background squares and sew them to 12 aqua squares, and I press the seams open. You're going to have one leftover square. Okay, so now let's get them laid out on the design board. We want it to look just like that one. And so I want to make sure that in the corner there's a color and not a background. And then I'll just flip them over the other way so that as you're laying them out, it forms a checkerboard. Now I continue this way until I have 5 rows down, and then I'm going to have 2 leftover segments and I put them to the side. And this is where my leftover square comes in. I'm going to grab that and put it up in the top corner. The next step is to sew these sections together. And I'm going to use my Seam So Easy guide here for an accurate 1/4 inch seam. And I'll just continue sewing them one right after the other, which is called chain piecing or clotheslining, however you want to say it. But I love doing it this way because it saves time and it saves thread. Now sometimes when I'm not sewing another block, I'll just grab a piece of fabric and stick it under my machine so that I can also save thread and time with that. And it'll just stay there until I start sewing on the same block in the next section. I continue to press my seams open by using my seam roller first, and then I'll just give them a quick press with the iron. As you know, I really like to press my seams open because I feel like that my blocks lie nice and flat that way. I often get asked if my quilts come apart because I press my seams open, and I can honestly say after all these years of quilting, I've never had one come apart. Next step after pressing is to lay them back out on the design board, and this is where my design boards really come in handy because you want to make sure that you lay it out the way that you want them. So what I'm going to end up doing is sewing these rows together here and sewing that extra square there at the top. Now most of the time I don't pin, but when I do I use my double pins. And I just stick them in once like this. I don't, pin them so it comes out the other side. I think that distorts them. I just stick it in. I can either sew over them, they're thin enough, or I can just take them out beforehand. But like I say, most of the time I just use my fingers, and as the seams come along, I just make sure they line up. I'm just worried about one seam at a time. I just hold it till it goes under, and then I line up the next one, and I just continue on that way until I get all the way to the end, and then I make sure that my ends line up. Okay, now I just have to sew this top row on, and then I can add the side. Now once this center is finished, I just add the outer strips. I cut those 2.5 by 10.5, and then 2.5 by 14.5. So now that all my seams are pressed open, I have an opportunity that I can turn the block around, and it doesn't matter which way the seams were pressed because they're all open, they're all going to match up, and I can do it exactly how I want it with each square in the position that I want. Of course they're all scrappy, but sometimes I like to have, you know, dark ones over there and light ones over there, and I just think it looks cuter. Okay, so there's my Chex Mix center. Now I just add the side strips first. Again, they're 10.5 inches long. And then the top are going to be 14.5 inches long. And of course, they're all 2.5 inches wide. Look how cute it's going to be sewn next to the other one with darker strips. Now when you sew my Chex Mix blocks with 2.5 inch squares, it finishes at 14 inches. That means it's 14.5 unfinished. Now I want to chat with you a little bit more about the pillow. Now again, when you're using 1.5 inch squares, the block finishes at 7 inches, and I cut my borders 3.5 inches wide. I added the side borders first, and they were cut 3.5 by 21.5, and then the top and the bottom are 3.5 by 27.5, and it's a 27-inch pillow form. The front and the back were quilted first before the pillow was sewn together, and that was done by my friend Julie Stubbs. Thanks, Julie. I really love how this pillow turned out. And I'm really excited to get my quilt put together too. I'm not sure how many blocks I'm going to do. I'm just going to keep sewing. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope you've enjoyed my tutorial for my Chex Mix blocks. I'll chat with you later.